be this, but I'm disguising it in order to please others. He would say even your conception of who this I is, that's compromising, has been formed by your relationships and interaction with other people and the stories you've read, and we'll talk about stories that give us images of these things. All right, so you've got your constructionist and your social self. So one of the things we say is that people become who they are in relationships with other people. You become who you are in relationships with other people. And if we, in talking with each other, come to agree about who you are and who I am, and then what kind of a world we're living in together, that becomes the functional reality for this group of people. They think that's what is going on. That's what is the truth about life and the world and people. That this is who you are, this is who I am. And so this gets into issues of racism, this gets into issues of any isms you can think about, where people construct a world where there are these different groups, and then we understand how everyone is supposed to relate to each other. And Mead would say, we have to realize that we have created that over a long time through a complicated symbolic interaction that we've had. We've used different words, we've used different language, and we've created this together. So we'll talk about the way this works in organizations as well. So one of the things I want you to do first is to make 15, write down on a sheet of paper 15 statements for yourself. I am. You don't have to show these to anybody else, but just take some time to do this right now. I am, and then complete that sentence 15 times. And I'm going to ask you some questions about those statements that you write down. Gets harder as you go on, right? Yeah. you get further on, you're like.
I take them. I am the Quinta.
All right, let me ask you a couple questions now as we think about this. Now, as you look at that list, whose ideas are these about you? Can you tag them with a person or a group of people who provided that idea for you to describe yourself? Maybe they described you that way. The point is to ask the question, is there a social origin to this self-description of yours? Can you identify anywhere that this might have come from to you, and then you interacted with that and claimed it for yourself? So maybe a parent, does it come from a parent, does it come from a friend, come from the news? Anybody? Are you seeing any?
I don't know. I just feel like the ones that I put stuff, I just feel like it's really what I actually think about myself.
Okay.
Like I didn't really think to myself because I feel like some people would disagree with me on the things I wrote, but I feel like
Okay.
I am who I am. Like I don't need people telling me yeah, people may perceive me a certain way, but
Okay, so as you look at that list, you're not seeing a lot of places where I got this idea from my brother or sister, I got this idea from my parents, or I got this idea from classmates who tell me, oh, you're really a funny, happy person, or you're something around, where do you get these ideas from? Laura?
I have some for myself, but a lot of them I've been told by my parents or people at work or my boyfriend or something.
Right, yeah. And I think that's what part of what Mead and Boomer want us to see, is that if we were to ask you who you are, who are you? I am this. And we pushed it to these 15 or sometimes they push it to 20. It gets really hard when you're doing 20. But where does this language come from that we use to describe ourselves? And Mead wants us to recognize that a lot of it can come from our social life that we have. Those of you who've identified some things that came socially to you, the next question I want to ask you is, how did they come to you? How did that happen for you? Was it, it probably was not a formal conversation where you sat down with somebody and you said, I want you to tell me who I am, and then they said, all right, you are this. How did those things come to you? What's the context of them coming to you?
Like one of the things I put is I am, and I put a good friend, and that's not necessarily something that someone tells you, but it's in the things that you do, or the things that someone does for you because you did it for them, or whatever. It's just something that's kind of created.
Okay, so you've identified yourself with that term. And it comes to you through a whole complex of interactions where you do things for people, people do things for you. And the name we give that is friendship. And so you say, I fit the definition of a friend. But what we're seeing is there's a social dimension to that, because it's defined by what friendship is, and we define ourselves because we find ourselves in those interactions. Anyone else? How did that term come to you? How does that arise? So it's just in part of the way people are interacting. They're not trying to define you. Nobody is trying to deliberately tell you. Although with friendships, right, sometimes you'll get cards, or you'll get e-cards or something. You were a great friend, thanks. So that is an explicit way that it happens. All right, now here's a third part of this. Then ask yourself the question, what effect does it have on you that you define yourself this way? What are the consequences of defining yourself this way? How does it change what you do, how you work? What are the consequences? What are the effects of it? And
You try to keep that title.
okay, so if it's a desirable cultural term, you want to maintain it, so it changes your behavior in that you seek to keep that title. So you want reflection. You want people to say, this is what you are.
Like if somebody says you're a good worker, you're not going to start slacking off. You're going to embrace that title and keep going forward.
Okay, so because you like that definition of yourself, this is who you want to be. I want to be a good worker, so I will do those things. So the identity and the actions get linked together. Your identity and your actions get merged. Did anyone else, I mean, you don't have to read it, but did anyone find one that they didn't like on there? And it has an effect on your life?
I am late all the time.
I'm late all the time. All right.
Friends and family.
So I'm late all the time. And that has an effect on the way people see you and the way...
I'm almost expected to be late now.
Okay.
It's like a running joke, kind of, but
But it becomes part of your identity.
that
Right.
I've been told to arrive a little bit earlier. And
Okay. So the effect of that then, what is the effect of that identity on you though? Does it make you feel bad about yourself? Does it make you change your behavior? Does it make you concerned?
yes.
You're still late, so
No. It kind of, it's like I'll address one issue, like that causes me to be late. And then because I'm expected to be late, it's like other issues will arise and become new excuses for being late. You know what I, like, it's kind of like
See,
new things to validate that.
Bloomer would ask, see, Bloomer would suggest this, that it's possible you get something positive out of that identity. That I'm different, I'm,
Fashionably late.
yeah, I'm important, I don't have to be there all the time, people laugh at me, that's a positive reinforcer of something. And so Bloomer would probably say you want to preserve that identity because it is functional. That it gives you something. That our identities, we preserve our identities when they give us.
Self-fulfilling prophecy will tie into this too.
Yes.
I expect to be late.
Right, we perpetuate it because we expect it to be that way. That works most effectively in job situations where you think, oh, I'm no good, I can't do this, and so you don't do it. You can't do it because you don't have the motivation to do it.
It's also hard to put a good spin on being late at all. But there are other words, like let's say for instance, if somebody says you're nosy, okay, well you can always say you're curious.
Okay,
Now curious isn't as bad as nosy. Nosy is not.
I
right.
say I'm worried.
And Bloomer would say those are two symbols. Those are social symbols that we attach to ourselves or other people attach to us, and we accept and we begin to let it define who we are. So that you would be very careful about letting other people define you too. You would pay attention to the consequences of these. Yeah, we're going to talk about in coordinated management of meaning, how this leads us to be able to think about changing who we are, changing the relationships we have, and changing the world that we create. So let me walk through a little bit of Mead for us so we get a sense of what's going on. So Mead was interested in this question of self and how society and mind interact. Do you come with an essential self, which then forms society, or does society affect your mind through the forming of a social self? So this was the question that Mead was facing. Now you see this is kind of early, right? It's 1930s. And from a communication studies standpoint, that's fairly early, because our field of communication studies really begins to heat up in the 1900s, the 1910, 20, 30s, 40s. I mean, rhetorical studies goes way back, but most scientific studies of communication are fairly recent. Okay, so he talked about there's much more going on about what we think of the world than the way the world is. We apply a lot of meaning to the world and give it a lot of meaning. So for instance, I recently lost a pair of sunglasses, right? So those are just sunglasses. So you say, well, just go out and buy another pair of sunglasses. But for me, those sunglasses were significant because they were part of a trip that I had taken. I had a really enjoyable trip. You know, they have history to them. And so an object is not just a thing, right? We give meaning to things, and then we begin to relate to things on the basis of the meanings that we give them. So you probably have some objects in your life that are just things, but you give them a lot of meaning, right? What would be some examples of that? Where in itself it may be just a book, or it may be a piece of cloth, or whatever, but to you it has a huge amount of meaning, and you might interact with that around people.
I had me and my boyfriend. We wrote our names and our dates on a rubber band, and I wore it. And when it popped, I was so hurt.
Okay.
The rubber band popped, so I still keep it. But it was a rubber band.
Okay, so a rubber band, you wrote your name on it, you wore it, and so this is an object. It's a thing, right? In itself, it has no meaning different than another rubber band and another rubber band, but because you gave it meaning, and then you began to build your interactions around it. So this became an important part of your relationship with somebody else. You created a world. You created a series of relationships around a symbol that you were interacting with. So Haley, you have a...
Yeah, I was going to say, jewelry with religious kind of icons
Okay.
on them are a really big example of that, because really it's just jewelry. Like, it's jewelry like...
Right, it's metal.
But just because it has like a Jewish star
Certain
or
shape.
a cross or whatever, like people associate it with, this like really big meaning.
Right, so an object in itself has no particular meaning. But when we interact with each other around it and give it some meaning, then all of a sudden it becomes very significant and important to our world. So like you say, a religious symbol or a book. There was a problem down in the Cuban prison in Guantanamo Bay. Do you remember the case where there was a big problem about the idea that the guards had flushed a Quran down the toilet? Do you remember that in the news? Okay. Now, think about that incident for a minute. You strip away all the interaction, all the symbols, and you have paper and water, right? But that's not all it is. Why is that not all it is? Well, because we have chosen to interact around these symbols in a certain way. It defines who I am, it defines who you are, it defines our power relationships. What I do with this symbol has a huge amount of meaning, and we can actually get involved in violence and fighting and killing over what we do with symbols.
It's like when they always bring up the subject of burning the American flag.
Burning the American flag, right.
And like everybody goes crazy over that, and everybody has huge opinions, and like it really is just fabric, and it really is just fire. And if you allow yourself or other people to believe that this is a symbol of something, then it is. But
Right.
It's really just what you attach to it.
Yeah. So this is what Mead was trying to get at. Mead was trying to say, we think we live in a world where things have meaning. A flag has meaning, a book has meaning, a jewelry has meaning. And Mead wanted to say, slow down a minute, realize that we have created the meanings of this. We've even created ourselves by a whole inner package of interactions that we've engaged in. And so before we go shooting and killing and hurting each other, let's think about how we created this system and what it means and who we want to be together. Pierce will push us more into that. Who do we want to be together? And that goes all the way from, two people in a relationship to a world. So, right. So, human beings act toward things on the basis of meanings that the things have for them. So my sunglasses, your rubber band, the flag, the book, the Quran, all of these things, we act toward them on the basis of the meanings that we've given them. But we don't give them meanings individually, we give them meanings in interaction. So there were other people involved in the sunglass thing. There was another person involved in the rubber band thing. There's huge numbers of people involved in the Quran as a symbol, right? So these meanings are a product of social interaction in society. And these meanings are modified, individual. People take them on and begin to change and shape those meanings. All right. So your groups now. So let's say you're in a company with your project, or a small group of people, or a sorority, or a band, or whatever it is you're working with. Mead would say to you that that group consists of organized and patterned interactions among individuals. That you could figure out what are the symbols that are important to this group of people. You know, what things do they organize around? It's like let's take a band, for instance. What's one thing a band organizes around? A central symbol for a band. Okay, some genre or something. It identifies who we are. We say, I am a this. Okay, so concerts, performances are a symbol around which we organize. That we all come together and do it. And sometimes sociologists call those rituals. Where we come together, we know how we're going to do this, we come together and we do it together, and then we leave. That's a ritual according to a sociologist. So we have patterned, in a sorority, you have meetings, you have events. We know we're going to do this, we come together, we do it, we go apart. It gives meaning to the world that we create. So whatever it is, the company, the band, the sorority, the insurance company, the department, consists of organized and patterned interactions among individuals. And what we want to study are face-to-face interactions. How are people interacting rather than on big, national levels? So this is where it's good for us in communication. How are people talking to each other? And how do they change and recreate social processes? How do they create what it is? Have you ever, any of you, been part of the forming of a brand new sorority or brand new band, a brand new company, a brand new organization? Has anybody been part of that? Okay. And so Mead would say that's a very important moment, because you're going to start to create patterns. This is true about relationships, your relationships. You're going to start to form patterns, and then those patterns are going to create meanings, and you're going to keep relating to those meanings, and they're going to solidify and they're going to grow. So you want to be very aware and very careful about them. You negotiate and you create a relationship. You create a world. They talk about this as a world, a social world. This is who we are, this is what we do, this is how we fit in, this is where we belong, this is what's going on in the world. We create that together. Yeah. And we are taught how to do this. So you don't come and create a new band or a new sorority in the middle of a blank slate. There are already sororities, there are other bands that give you ideas about how this is going to happen. You don't just create it out of nothing. So every company that you encounter, every job you're going to have, this is all true. They've created something there. And it's been shaped by other things, it's been shaped by all the people that are in there. And there are important symbols that you don't want to mess with. Might be the coffee, maker. It might be a table in a certain place. You got to learn the symbols around which people have organized themselves. Might be a book. But this is where it gets arguable. They argue that there's no objective structure to social life outside of individual experience and perception. So the way we think, well, of course that's how it has to be. Mead argues, no, we create it. Now you may agree or disagree with that, but that's what he wants to say. That there's no objective structure. So when we talk about ourselves as Americans, or we talk about racial groups, Hispanic and Black, he says none of that exists objectively. It could be otherwise, which is where writers of fiction and other people make us think about how worlds might have been different and how people could identify themselves differently. Okay. So the reflexive self is the one that's formed, the way our social roles evolve out of interaction. Society is the sum of human relations rather than objective institutions. So it is what we have created it to be as we interact with each other. Anyone having any thoughts, insights, the way this affects your groups you're working with, or situations that you see going on? It should give you, though, an awareness about what am I creating, how am I participating in shaping some world that's going on. So this is, again, getting at the reflexive self. We emerge from interaction. It's the idea. Who you are is not just given, it emerges out of the interactions, and it's not fixed. We have complicated, people learn new meanings, we allow ourselves to create new selves. One of the things that Mead says is that we have a number of selves too. You know, we are different selves in different situations. We're not always the same self. We learn how to do that. All right, so this is Mead. So let me just wrap this up and we'll take a short break and we'll come back and we'll do coordinated management and meaning. Let's do a case. Let's do a little case. Let's say you've got an organization that's having a fight around the coffee room in the building. Okay, you've got a company, and people are having fights about who gets to use the coffee room at what time, who's responsible for cleaning it up, and everyone is talking to each other about the other people and how they don't keep it clean and they don't do what they should do around this coffee hour. Do a little quick analysis of that from Mead. What's going on here? How did it get this way? What does Mead help you to see about that situation? Laura, you want to try?
If it's just complete chaos like that, it sounds like the people that initially set up the company and set up the coffee hour or whatever it was had their way and it worked, and maybe they left and all these new people come in and they don't know what to do, they don't know the original rules, or there's nobody taking a lead and helping construct any kind of organization of time or anything. It's just kind of like a free-for-all.
Okay, so one of the things we would say is that this coffee room is an important symbol in this social setting, in this group of people. And that people define themselves a little bit on the basis of this symbol. Am I a person who cleans it? Am I a person who's allowed to use it? That within this setting, this has become a very important social symbol. So you begin to realize it's not, you can't go in there and say, you people are being really stupid. You know, it's just coffee. You know, it's just a coffee room. It's not just a coffee room. It is a social symbol around which people have constructed their sense of identity. So what's happened somehow is there's been a loss of coordination in the group about how this is, and people have identified themselves. Now, what's the answer then? for this. Hey, if this system, how did this system get established? What does Mead say? How does identity and symbols get established?
It's all an interaction.
So it's all in the interactions that take place. So what's going to happen is the facilitator, the consultant's going to have to come in and introduce some new ways for people to interact with each other. There's going to have to be new ways of talking with each other, new ways of understanding each other. So if we've got two groups that are at each other, they've constructed that relationship, and for all purposes, it's real. We've got to get them to begin to construct new kinds of relationships with each other, define themselves in new ways.